Well, thank you everyone so much for joining today's webinar. This is called the Financial Vulnerability and Access to Financial Help Gaps for Canadians Living with Low Incomes. Really look forward to having you join, and this meeting is going to be recorded as well. Katie, if you'd like to just go to the next slide. Thank you. So just to introduce our team, so I'm Eloise. I'm the CEO and founder of Financial Resilience Institute. I'm also accompanied by Patrice Marindi, who's our senior data analyst and consultant, who has contributed a huge amount of analytics for some of the data that we're going to be sharing today. And then I also have Katie Suter, who's our business development, communications and impact consultant. And she is going to be working with us and helping to host today's session as well.
Amazing. Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Just before we get into all the great data and insights, we'll just go over some short webinar logistics. If you can just please ensure that your microphone is on mute for the presentation portion of the webinar. We are happy to, at the end, when we have a little bit of a discussion, you can come off mute if you prefer, rather than putting questions or comments in the chat. But just while we're presenting, if you could stay on mute. The reports that this webinar relates to are available on our website on the Low Income Canadians Reports page. We will be sending out this slide deck as a PDF following the webinar in the next couple of days, as well as the link to the recording as we are recording the webinar today, which we are happy for you to share with any colleagues or peers that might benefit from hearing what we're speaking about today. And as well, just as a little bit of an overview, we'll be presenting for around 45 minutes with time for a Q&A at the end. As well, if you have any questions during the presentation portion, just pop them in the chat and we'll get to them as soon as we can. And as well, just to start off, we want to do a little bit of a land acknowledgement. So the Financial Resilience Institute is headquartered in Vancouver, British Columbia, where we are grateful to work, live, and learn on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We acknowledge Indigenous peoples as the stewards of this land and recognize that our work is carried out across the traditional territories of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. This grounds our ongoing journey toward a path of truth and reconciliation with our Indigenous neighbors, clients, and partners and stakeholders now and in the future. So I'll give it to Eloise to take it away.
Thank you, Katie. So Financial Resilience Institute is a not-for-profit. We're based in Vancouver, and we're a leading independent authority in Canada on financial well-being and financial resilience. Our purpose is all about building financial resilience and well-being together. We recognize that systemic change needs cross-sector collaboration, and we're all about wanting to create a better world through improved financial resilience and financial well-being for all. So next slide. As part of our impact goals, we want to reduce financial vulnerability for Canadians and households that need help most. We obviously are working to be a catalyst for positive change, and sharing data, impact measurement, and supporting partnerships for cross-sector collaboration is what we're all about. So this webinar is part of our thought leadership and that goal. And then we're also looking to foster financial inclusion and empowerment while helping to build a more resilient, equitable, and inclusive Canada. So our not-for-profit is about building evidence-based research and solutions in collaboration with policymakers, financial institutions, employers, not-for-profits, and others. And the instruments that we bring to the table help to target investments, but also to measure the power of certain impacts and interventions on those who need help more, those who need help most. Next slide. So just a couple of definitions. We define households living with low incomes as all of those with a household income under 25,000, as well as those excluding single people that have a household income under 49,999. And this is the definition that we've used for several years, which is also the definition as per Statistics Canada. Next slide. And just a few other definitions. We developed a framework in 2016, which is a holistic financial well-being framework. We define financial well-being as a state of being wherein a person can fully meet their current and future financial obligations, feel secure in their financial future, and is able to make choices that allow them to enjoy life. Financial resilience is about your ability to get through financial hardships, stresses, and shocks as a result of unplanned life events. And then financial inclusion refers to the ability of individuals and businesses to access useful and affordable financial products and services that meet their needs. And these include bank or savings accounts, accessible, affordable credit, insurance, financial advice, and other benefits and offerings that can help them move forward. Next slide. So we have a number of instruments that we have been sharing to help catalyze positive change across Canada. One is the Financial Resilience Index model, which I created with a pre-pandemic baseline of February 2020. This measures household financial resilience. We also have the complementary longitudinal national financial well-being studies instrument. That's number 2. And that has been, we're now just going into our 17th study. This is conducted 3 times a year with a very robust sample size of 5,000 adult Canadians with boost samples of low-income Canadians. And in this study, we have many financial inclusion and access to financial help data and indicators which we're tracking for Canadians overall and from a disaggregated perspective. Last year, we also launched a subjective financial well-being index model linked to an overall well-being score, which is a less sophisticated instrument from the perspective of impact measurement, but we have made it fully available for any organization, any not-for-profit, any organization that wants to measure the financial well-being of their customers or stakeholders at any time, as well as their overall well-being. And all 3 instruments are based on over 10 years of longitudinal data and very significant statistical analysis. Next slide. So the financial well-being study, we have conducted boost samples of low-income Canadians over many years because we feel it's incredibly important to measure the financial vulnerability and challenges for those who need help most. The organizations that partner with us are also add customized questions to this, which is how we're able to essentially measure the impact of certain interventions on improved financial resilience and financial well-being outcomes for their customers or employees or communities at scale. So if you have any more questions on this, let me know. But the Financial Resilience Index model itself is getting a lot of recognition globally. It's the first of its kind in the world. It is based on Canadian data. What it measures is financial resilience at the national, provincial segment. So that includes low-income households, right down to the individual household level. And it's based on over 10 years of data and is a very robust regression model. Next slide. So there are 9 indicators that basically contribute to a household's financial resilience. These span behavioral indicators such as planning ahead financially, to behaviors such as one's liquid savings buffer, to financial stress and other indicators. And people are scored from 0 to 100 based on the index model, where extremely vulnerable households have a financial resilience score of 0 to 30, and financially resilient households have a score of 70.01 to 100. So we're actually now at the 14th index release, which is crazy, as of June, and we're just about to launch our next study in October. And so any other questions on the index model, please let us know. But we are really leveraging this as a community asset for good to help provide evidence and data for the ecosystem to help essentially target investments for those who need help most. I think you can go to the next slide now, Katie. The sample sizes are hugely robust. So the data in this report is really centered around the February 2025 data and trended data, where we have a household sample size of just over 6,100 adult Canadians. Those are primary and joint financial decision makers from a representative sample of the population by household income, age, province, and gender. We also have an extremely robust sample size of just over 1,100 Canadians Canadians living with low incomes. And as Katie said, those trended reports are on our website as well. Next slide. So just before we go into the low income households and financial vulnerability aspect, why our not-for-profit exists is because financial vulnerability is a mainstream issue in Canada, actually spanning all household income demographics. And so based on the latest June index, the Canada Mean Financial Resilience Score is 52.39. So Canadians at the national level are just approaching resilience, and we only have 24% of the population, so just under a quarter, that are actually financially resilient. Next slide. So household financial vulnerability spans all income demographics. You can have a household income of over 100,000, but be extremely vulnerable based on this index model. And but what we do see is that Canadians living with low incomes are more likely to be represented in extremely vulnerable and financially vulnerable segments, which we'll get to in a minute. Next slide. So we have been working to help prove the social impact case of policymakers in particular helping to build a more resilient, equitable, and inclusive Canada. And this data highlights a story that we've been telling for a while. So we've been tracking Canadians' financial well-being, emotional well-being, and other well-being dimensions for many years. We did use the index to complement government administrative data with Statistics Canada, and we have basically used the index to prove that Canadians that are more financially vulnerable based on their financial resilience score have lower levels of financial well-being, but they actually have lower levels of well-being across every single well-being dimension. So i.e., if you help to reduce financial vulnerability, there can be knock-on impacts for policymakers and others in terms of overall health, productivity and engagement at work, and many other aspects that support family and overall well-being of Canadians. Next slide. The other important aspect, just for everyone to know, is that financial resilience mobility is real. So we have conducted a lot of longitudinal analytics. So that's with survey respondents that essentially have answered previous studies and had their financial resilience score created with us in the past. And what we've done is we've proved through several reports and many analytics that people can both slip backwards in terms of their financial resilience as a result of less healthy financial behaviors or an unplanned life event such as disability or divorce impacting their household or for other reasons. Similarly, households can move up a segment and they can materially improve their financial resilience and their financial resilience score within just a few months. And this is really important because it validates that the work of the financial empowerment ecosystem to provide solutions and supports to help Canadians move forward, they are important and they can make a difference. It also is important because we need to think of this as a continuum. People are not simply always extremely vulnerable. They can improve, they can move forward, but also they can need more targeted and ongoing help through their life. So this data was in our June report, and we've used the index to highlight inequities for many, many years. We're tracking a number of indicators, and what we see here, which is, challenging and a similar story to what we've been showing for a while, is that, not surprisingly, households that are more financially vulnerable are much, much more likely to be negatively impacted by financial hardship. They're much more likely to be struggling with the high cost of living and increase in cost of living. Next slide. And they are also much more likely to be challenged in terms of food insecurity, not being able to get the food that they need, housing affordability, or being able to meet their essential expenses. So just as an example here, we can see that 38% of extremely vulnerable Canadians are facing food insecurity as of June, compared to just 2% of financially resilient households. And this again really validates the criticality of more targeted support for households that need help most, with the financial resilience lens a sort of key overlay that can help target support. So the index does go down right down to the individual household level, and it was very important to me that we create this as a free tool that any Canadian, any person around the world can use to understand their financial resilience score, and very importantly, how they stack up compared to a real robust index and benchmark data, and compared to Canadians of a similar age and household income as them at any time. So if you want to check your financial resilience score, you can go to this website. It does link to a free bank of resources with articles and self-serve tools from government, FCAC, and other organizations. If we would like to expand this free tool in terms of the resources, so if you have any independent articles you'd like to contribute to the Institute, please let us know and we'd be delighted to add those in. We've also been partnering with key partners like Prosper Canada and others to utilize the data to support advocacy and essentially get federal government and others to do more to help those who need help most. So lots of trended reports here. And next slide. And we are really thrilled to have also contributed, not only as an FCAC measurement plan adopter, financial inclusion metrics and data for the ecosystem, but we've also been thrilled to contribute our data to Prosper Canada's excellent report. So the Canada's Financial Help Gap report, which really did make the case for why Canadians need more help with their financial help back in a few years ago. And then there's another report that's coming out very soon, which is obviously very focused on helping to close the financial help gap, which is fantastic. And those reports, they really do identify different gaps that Canadians face, and particularly those who are come from lower income households, such as help in managing debt, help in tax filing and accessing benefits, help in adhering to a budget and or financial plan, or just navigating relevant financial products and services that can help people move forward. There's also a strong alignment between our focus and other organizations' focus on financial resilience and financial well-being, and Canada's poverty reduction strategy. So poverty reduction and financial vulnerability are obviously very, very interlinked, and our work is all about helping to also in line with dignity and opportunity and inclusion to help build financial security, financial resilience, and overall well-being for not only individuals but for families and communities, knowing that this is incredibly important, including in our very uncertain world. So we're just going to talk a little bit now about some of the data in the report. So it's not a perfect estimate, but based on our survey data, we see about 20% of the adult population are purely defined as Canadians living with low incomes. So that represents about just over 5 million Canadian households as of February. So a relatively sizable population. Next slide. And when we do analytics based on the Financial Resilience Index model, while the Canada mean financial resilience score is 52.87 as of February, what we see is that Canadians living with low incomes have a mean financial resilience score of 40.06. So that's a good 12 index points lower than Canadians overall. And those with households income under 25,000 are even more challenged with a delta of 16 index points compared to Canadians overall. So financial vulnerability is much more prevalent and much more of a problem for Canadians living with low incomes. Next slide. We also see that, as I said, that Canadians living with low incomes are much more likely to be represented in the extremely vulnerable and financially vulnerable segments. They're actually doubly as likely. And even though, so you can see on the right-hand side, even though we see the good news story that there's actually been a reduction in the proportion of low-income Canadians that are represented in the extremely vulnerable and financially vulnerable segments in February 2025 compared to June 2022, they are still much more challenged compared to Canadians overall and do need more targeted support. So we've got about 65% of the population that are low income that are extremely vulnerable or financially vulnerable. Next slide. And then, very concerningly for us, the mean financial resilience score of Canadians with households income under 25,000, their mean financial resilience score has actually deteriorated by 2 points, 2 index points in since June 2021, when more of them were buffered by COVID-19 federal relief and had more were less challenged by the cost of living as well. So we're also tracking things for key populations. There's a lot more data on our website, but what you can see from this is that Canadians living with low incomes actually have a mean financial resilience score as of February that's a little bit less. It's less good compared to Indigenous Canadians. We have seen improvements in the mean financial resilience score of Indigenous Canadians, which is fantastic. They're better off, however, than Canadians who are not able to work owing to a disability that have a mean financial resilience score of 30.39 as of February, with this population the most challenged that we have been tracking for many, many years. Next slide. That said, so you have to look at populations from an intersectional perspective, and that's what we're doing as an institute, as well as tracking things longitudinally. So if you face more than one barrier, so for example, you're not only low income, but you're also a low income renter struggling with your debt manageability, and or you are not working owing to a disability, your financial vulnerability is much, much higher compared to someone who just faces one of those barriers. So this data is just one example, but you can see as of February, the mean financial resilience score of men with low incomes overall is 42.3, with those folks being financially vulnerable. But if you're a low income renter who's also struggling with your debt manageability, your score is significantly lower at 27.8 and you're extremely vulnerable. So the not for profits and other organizations that are supporting Canadians that are facing more than one barrier, your work is more important than ever. I'll just hand over to my colleague Patrice now.
Thank you very much, Eloise. So here we will continue discussing with some of the challenges, and when it comes to financial hardship, we see that up to 61% of Canadians living with low income are facing financial hardship, compared to about 38% of Canadians overall. It's not only financial hardship that we track also many other stressors, and one of them is, for example, facing barriers barriers that impact the ability for one to earn income. And we can see that 59% of Canadians living with low income have a negative or zero savings rate, and up to 77% are actually facing barriers that impact the ability to earn money. So when we compare those numbers to Canadian overall, we see that for Canadian living with low income are very high. Those are just some stressor challenges that we track through the Institute. So we also try to give you an idea on some trended data, for example, on the ability for Canadians living with low income to be able to meet their essential expenses. And we can see that up to 40%, like 41% for February 2025 of Canadians living with low income are not able to meet their essential expenses, compared to Canadian overall, which is 22%. So we also try to understand how are the financial behavioral of Canadian with low income. And we can see when it comes to financial behavioral, we can see that indeed low income are less likely to have managed or set up or building an emergency savings fund. So compared to Canadian overall, they are behind. We also see the same trend on many of the financial behavior, like only 15% are able to create or update their financial plan to support with the support of the financial advisor. These are some more financial behavior, and we can see that up to 61% of Canadians with low income are drawing from their savings, right? And also 17% are actually have been deferred the loan or credit card payment. So these are just some realities that exist on the financial behavior. When it comes to consumer behavior, what we are seeing is that Canadians living with low income are actually working hard to uh, to go out of the challenges they are facing. And we can see from the data that 66% of Canadians living with low income are taking up steps in the behavior to actually better manage their finances, which is we see also the similar trend with Canadian overall, but we can see on most of the consumer behavioral behaviors, low-income Canadian doing well. We can see also that they are even taking 39% are taking an additional work or side hustle to earn more income, right? So they are doing their best and working hard to try to go to the next, not to remain as low-income Canadian. So I will hand over to Eloise.
Thanks, Patrice. Fantastic. Great job. So, as Patrice said, Canadians living with low incomes are working extremely hard to bridge through and overcome barriers. That said, it's extremely difficult for them. And we're tracking a lot of financial stress indicators for them as well as for Canadians overall. So, for Canadians overall, what we see is that financial stress is negatively impacting the mental health, physical health, productivity and performance at work, and other aspects of Canadians. We're the only organization that has been tracking this since 2017 as a longitudinal study. This is very important because again, it proves the positive social impact case of improved support for Canadians overall and those who need help most. Next slide. However, what we see is that for Canadians living with low incomes, that not surprisingly, their financial stress levels are significantly higher. So, as an example, while Canadians overall, 68% of them report that money worries negatively impacts their mental health. This is the case for 77% of Canadians living with low incomes as of February. Similarly, while 42% of Canadians, which is a significant number, report that financial stress negatively impacts their productivity or engagement at work, with productivity being a key issue for our economy and for policymakers. That's actually the case for 59% of Canadians living with low income. So why is this important? This is important because if you are, for example, an employer and you're doing work to help improve the financial resilience and financial well-being of your employees, including, for example, low-income Canadian employees, it can have a real positive knock-on effect, not only on their lives, but also on productivity for your organization. Next slide. So this is just a bit about the financial well-being index model. There's more information, a whole PowerPoint and a toolkit on the website. Next slide. We just wanted to make sure that this was visible so that not-for-profits and others on the line, as appropriate, may want to actually utilize the model which we've created with a scoring tool, with a user guide, so that you can score the financial well-being of your stakeholders, your employees, your customers, pre and post intervention and over time on an ongoing basis as a way of helping to measure the impact of your programs. If you have any questions on that, please let us know. When we look at the financial well-being score of Canadians living with low incomes and their overall well-being score, this is as of February, again, not surprisingly, those scores are lower than for Canadians overall. So it's not only financial resilience that is lower, but it's also financial well-being and overall well-being that's more challenged for these families. Next slide. So we also have been leading the way to measure financial inclusion and access to help gaps for Canadians and those who are more financially vulnerable. I'll just pass over back to Patrice on this.
Thank you very much, Eloise, and you will go back again to this slide to provide some more insight if need be. But we also, as Eloise was mentioning, we also track the financial inclusion challenges. And from what we are seeing, this is just a snapshot of the data that we have. and we collect this data from many, many more survey rounds. So we can see that our data is showing that those who are extremely vulnerable are actually more likely to face financial inclusion challenges compared to financially resilient people. For example, if we just look at those who could not get financial support or the advice they need, we have up to 15% of extremely vulnerable compared to 1% of financial resilient Canadians. When we look at those who could not have access to help manage their debt, we have 15 of extremely vulnerable Canadian not not having access to it compared to 0% of Canadians who are financially resilient. So similarly, we also look at the Canadian living with low income and compare them to Canadian overall, and we see the same trend, right? We see again, Canadian living with low income are more likely to face financial inclusion challenges compared to Canadian overall. And we can see, for example, up to 9% of Canadian living with low income are not able to access financial help programs or services. And we know that these are things that can help them to go out of these challenges they are facing, right? And as Louise was mentioning, we have a study that is coming soon that we are giving deep and more understanding on this. And we can see that in all the challenges, financial inclusion challenges, we see Canadian living with low income having a high numbers of people reporting them compared to Canadian overall. So we also track the access, the affordability to access to financial help. And we see, again, these are just data related to Canadian living with low income. And we can see that they are reporting that they are not able to find accessing affordable financial help when it comes to savings for other goals, right? We see up to 21% of being able to build emergency savings. Where from the previous slide, we saw that few of them compared to Canadian overall are actually able to build an emergency savings. And we see again that up to 20% are also reporting that they are unable to find affordable financial help to help them with these challenges they are facing. So this also relates to affordable credit. As we know, most of our data are also showing that Canadian living with low income go, for example, regularly to high interest debts. But here we see again, the data are actually showing that up to only 31% of Canadian living with low income actually report that they have access to affordable credits, right? Compared to 51% of Canadian overall. In essence, like 70% are not able to get affordable credit, which is also put them in very challenging situation when it comes to their credit and debt. So I will hand over to Lois to speak about taxes.
Thanks, Patrice. Really appreciate that. And yeah, so before I go into this, so just building on what Patrice said, we're seeing at the national level that financial inclusion and access to help challenges are actually getting better for Canadians overall. That said, they're more challenging for Canadians living with low incomes and for those who are more financially vulnerable. And we're also seeing that there are specific financial help gaps, which are much more exacerbated for Canadians living with low income. So this is just an example. What we see is that over half of Canadians living with low incomes report needing help to file their taxes, with a third having to pay for tax filing support. And we've been creating this sort of data and measuring this for some of our partners like Prosper Canada to help, again, validate the criticality of offerings being provided through the financial empowerment sector and also through government to help people to basically optimize and make the most of government benefits to tax file and to improve their financial resilience in ways that help their families. Next slide. So as we've talked about, this index is very powerful in terms of highlighting the inequities, highlighting the financial inclusion and access to help gaps for Canadians and for those who are more financially vulnerable. But it's also a very powerful instrument for proving the positive impact of improved financial inclusion and access to help on improved financial resilience outcomes and improved financial well-being outcomes for Canadians and specific populations. So you can see, for example, on the left-hand side that as of June, this is just snapshot data as an example, but as of June 2022, we see that, for example, many more extremely vulnerable Canadians report they couldn't access the financial support or advice they needed over the past 12 months. But on the right hand side, and this is again just example financial help gaps, but what we see is that people, and this is Canadians overall, this is not low income Canadians, but people overall that were able to access these sort of financial help services over the past 12 months have significantly higher significantly higher mean financial resilience scores compared to those who are challenged from a financial inclusion and access to help perspective. As Patrice alluded to, we're going one step further actually as an institute where we're actually proving the correlation between improved financial inclusion and improved financial resilience outcomes, with more work on this to follow in an upcoming report. We see financial inclusion, improved financial inclusion as a pathway to improve financial resilience. And there definitely are specific types of financial help which can be even more powerful than others in helping to drive improved financial resilience outcomes for Canadians overall and those who need help most. So, as an example, help in managing debt is an extremely, extremely powerful one. More to follow. Next slide. So we've also used this index model to prove, again, for the very first time in the world, that by people having reported sufficient insurance protection, with insurance often an overlooked area, there again are improved financial resilience outcomes. With another report on this, commissioned by our partner and cooperators on our website as well. So this is important because Canadians living with low incomes need to have sufficient insurance protection, and this correlation is evident across every single income demographic. Next slide. So that's the report there, which is on our website on another page if you would like it. Very, very powerful data. Next slide. And yet we also see that, for example, Canadians living with low incomes are much less likely to report that they have sufficient insurance protection. So only 40% of them report that they're likely that they feel they have sufficient reported insurance. And you know, with insurance, people also don't know what they don't know. So they can think that they have sufficient insurance protection, but actually they don't. But lots and lots of impact opportunities to help Canadians and those with low incomes to improve their financial security and financial resilience as from a protection perspective, as well as through saving, planning, and investing. Next slide. So, and it's not just about access to relevant products, it's also about getting the right financial advice. So this is again just more example data, but what we see on the right-hand side is that Canadians living with low incomes are much less likely to report that they're confident that their household is getting the right financial advice to help them protect against the unexpected. Now, clearly, this can be provided through self-serve tools and other options, but we also know that people facing barriers can also face challenges in terms of accessing digital tools, etc. So this is, again, a call to action to the ecosystem to help do more to help Canadians who need help most, knowing that we all have a role to play. And this is also about plain English. And it's about making things accessible for all. Next slide. So this report and this webinar very much complements the excellent reports created by our partner Prosper Canada, with the webinar last week being very complementary to this one, and our work together supporting the ecosystem in terms of making the case for why Canadians living with low incomes and those facing barriers really need more targeted support from the financial empowerment ecosystem. And we believe firmly that this needs to be done in a strategic, sustainable way. So there are countries like the UK and Australia where this is very much embedded into the way things happen. And there's a long-term approach and long-term investment happening for those who need help most. The federal government's $60 million funding to provide enhanced community delivered financial help is definitely a step in the right direction. And our institute was thrilled to provide the data to help make the case for that funding, and that program is going to be extraordinary to help get those who need help most enhanced services. But we have to recognize that this is a long-term problem and sustained funding is critical. We also need to recognize, and our data highlights, that those who are more financially vulnerable have specific needs and access challenges, and they do need more targeted support. This needs to be scalable. It's not easy how it's delivered, but it remains critical for policymakers and others to play their role in providing more targeted support for those who need help most. And we firmly believe that robust impact measurement, independent longitudinal impact measurement is absolutely critical to inform timely, targeted policies and measures, and also to prove the power of certain interventions over others. And that's the work that we're doing to help bring that to the ecosystem and to policymakers. More information about us and our work is on our website. We will share the PDF of this report as well, and we are making this available, knowing that many people are busy and weren't necessarily able to join the webinar today, but we're going to post it to make it available for people to view anytime. Okay, so thank you all so much for your time, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.